I met Roger on one of my many trips between California and Phoenix about 35 years ago. It was a mid-afternoon July day, and I was driving I-10. It was just a few miles to the east of the Colorado River, and as I was driving along, I noticed on the side of the road there was an 18, 20-year-old guy that was walking along, and he had no shirt on, and he had no hat, and he was carrying no water. He had no clue. And he was extremely sunburned. And even though he was not hitchhiking, I pulled over. I suspect that you probably would have done the same thing. And I asked him if he was all right, and he assured me that he was just fine and that he was going to walk to Phoenix. And at that point I knew that he had been out in the sun way too long, and I invited him to ride with me because I was on my way to Phoenix as well. And fortunately I had some extra water in my car to share, and now even to this day, anytime I cross the desert, I carry a lot of extra water with me. I don't know who taught me that I should be carrying a lot of water when I cross the desert, but that sounds kind of like a parental thing, always be prepared. And apparently Roger had been driving an old clunker toward Phoenix, and he was on his way to Phoenix to start some kind of mechanics school that was in Phoenix at the time. I don't know what it was called, and I can't remember all the details of the story, but he had gotten off the interstate, and I'm not exactly sure where, but he had gotten off the interstate somewhere, and the car got stuck in the desert. You've heard this story before, right? I mean, you hear it on the news all the time. The car got stuck in the desert, and so he decided that he was going to walk out. And fortunately, he found the freeway again, and in his mind, he was then going to hoof it all the way to Phoenix. I mean, how far could it be, right? I mean, he was already in Arizona, and he was a strong, invincible, young 20-year-old guy, and Roger was actually really quite clueless on so many levels. I learned in our discussion as we drove to Phoenix. Well, every year we hear these kinds of stories of people who somehow get off the paved roads and they end up getting stuck out in the desert, and some of them actually die because of that. And when you hear these stories, you begin to wonder, just what are people thinking when they do stuff like that? I mean, where's your common sense? Why do people drive off the road and get out there and then you just start to wonder, why do they do it? And I'm pretty sure that it's not just a new phenomena, that it's not kind of like this is suddenly a problem that's hit us in this modern era. There were people in the ancient Middle East who were doing the same kind of thing way back when the Proverbs were being compiled. Obviously, they were not driving cars. And obviously, there were no interstates that they were working with. But there were people who took wrong turns and got off on the wrong path, and they ended up in danger, and sometimes, they paid for their errors, sometimes with their lives. At that point, there were no highway patrol. There was no search and rescue that was going to come out and find all these people, and because the population was a lot less, there were fewer people around, your chances of coming across somebody if you were lost were a lot slimmer than they are now. These stories, these experiences provide the backdrop. They are the illustration toward the point that the proverb is making about the importance of living a wisdom-defined life, living on the wise path. There are two paths from which you can choose. There is the road that leads to destruction, and the road that leads to health and life and abundance. And this is a recurring theme in the book of Proverbs. And these Proverbs are always begging the question, which path are you on? Which path are you on? And that is certainly the case in our text this morning, Proverbs 4:10 through 19. Turn to verse 10. Let's start to look at the section. Listen, my son. Listen, my son. That is, I'm old. The writer is speaking. I'm old, and I'm experienced, and I've learned a few things that can help you out. Don't be an arrogant jerk and ignore what I have to say just because you are young and you think that you know more than you actually do. And it's not just that I like to hear myself talk, and I'm not just pontificating because it makes me feel important as an old geezer to be able to impart my thoughts, my ideas to you. By the way, if you look at the Proverbs, how wisdom is usually portrayed or framed in the Proverbs, it's often framed as an older person. It's the older woman, it's the mother, it's the older man, the father who's giving the advice, who's giving these words of wisdom. And in most cultures, respect comes with age. Right? The older you get, the more your word is weighted. Now, of course, American culture is built around the inverse. The ideal in American culture is to be young, and the younger you are, the more attention you get. Although there are pockets of kind of old school thinking even in our culture. I was riding the L train in Chicago from Midway Airport to the Loop, which is downtown Chicago. A few months ago I was in Chicago teaching a class, and I had luggage. I mean, I had more luggage than I should have had, but I had to bring some supplies for the class I was teaching, and I was on this crowded train, and they have a nice train system there, and it was clean and wonderful and all that, but it was crowded at that point, and there was a young guy in his 20s who was also coming from the airport, and he had as much luggage as I had, maybe even more, I'm not quite sure. He got up from his seat and he insisted that I take his seat. He practically pushed me into his seat. Now, usually as a good American, I would have argued with him and said, well, I'm not that old. And then you would, the idea is you pretend to be insulted, right? That he saw me as old and that I was incapable of dealing with all of this on my own. But I did what he asked me to do because he was a nice young boy, and I wanted to encourage his kindness, his kind spirit. So I did it for his sake. Graciously, And at that point, I genuinely felt like a senior citizen. Yes. And I actually did appreciate his gesture. I thought it boded well for him and for the community that this was happening on their trains. But I think that it is not as normal for Americans as it would be for others, including the Middle East in the time of Solomon. The elderly, fatherly figure was strong. And I'm elderly now. I first learned that when I was living on Guam, right? I heard of this radio report on Guam about an accident in which an elderly man was injured crossing the street. And, I thought, oh man, an elderly guy got hurt. And then I heard the news, I read the story the next day, and he was 50 years old. That guy's younger than I am, and he's elderly, so I must be elderly too. So this is the elderly, fatherly figure that's strong, and so what I'm saying is you got to listen to what I'm saying. And when he addresses the reader as son, he is saying, I've got the years to back this up. And I am calling you son. I care about you. I care about your future. take in my speech, then the years of your life will be many. That is, if you want to live long and if you want to prosper, pay attention. Right? Look at verse 11. I teach you the path of wisdom. I lead you in straight courses. Again, wisdom is framed as a pathway. It's a well-worn, it's a straight pathway. It's not somebody's idea of a shortcut where you're cutting through with your machete and you're trying to keep track of where you are along the way, and hopefully you're not slipping and sliding in the mud, which is what happens when you're whacking your way through some bush with a machete. This rather is a pathway of maturity. This is a pathway that's well experienced. It's well-worn wisdom, he says. Verse 12, when you walk, you will not be hindered. You won't be hindered. When you run, you won't stumble on this particular pathway. That is, if you stay on the path, you're not going to get hurt. And you won't encounter the obstacles that will be impeding your forward movement. So verse 13, hold on to instruction. Don't slack off. Protect it, for it is your life. In other words, I'll say it again. Hold on to what I've taught you. Protect it with your very life. Don't risk it. Don't risk getting off that pathway and driving out in the desert. And certainly don't become a slacker like Tom. That's in the text right there, like Tom.
Verse 15.
Verse 15, yeah, there you go. No, Tom is the opposite of slacker, so I can pick on him. And in case you are a dolt, and in case you still do not get it, let me say it again with slightly different words. You see, the Proverbs is writing and saying, you see, there is actually another pathway. There is another pathway that you could take, but don't. Verse 14. Don't go on the way of the wicked. Don't walk on the highway of evil people. Avoid it. Don't turn on to it. Not even for a moment. Don't even get on there for a moment thinking you're just going to go a little ways and get. Not even for a short detour, because if you turn on to it, you can't easily get off of it because all the exits have been blocked off way down there. The exits, they don't work. You know, they're having construction or whatever. There's no way to get off of this thing. It's kind of like Hotel California. You remember that, the Eagles song in the
Plenty of room
70s in the LA?
Yeah.
You all know it? You ready to sing, okay? That's right. On a dark desert highway, get the imagery here. Cool wind in my hair, warm smell of colitas rising up through the air. Up ahead in the distance I saw a shimmering light. My head grew heavy and my sight grew dim. I had to stop for the night. There she stood in the doorway. I heard the mission bell, and I was thinking to myself, this could be heaven or this could be hell. That's right. Then she lit up a candle and she showed me the way. There were voices down the corridor. I thought I heard them say, welcome to the Hotel California. Such a lovely place. Such a lovely place. Plenty of room in the Hotel California. Any time of year, you can find it here. Her mind is Tiffany twisted. She got the Mercedes-Benz. She got a lot of pretty boys that she calls friends. How they dance in the courtyard, sweet summer sweet. Some dance to remember, some dance to forget. So I called up the captain. Please bring me my wine. He said, we haven't had that spirit here since 1969. And still those voices are calling from far away. Wake you up in the middle of the night just to hear them say, welcome to the Hotel California. Such a lovely place, such a lovely place. They living it up at the Hotel California. What a nice surprise. Bring your alibis. Mirrors on the ceiling, the pink champagne on ice. And she said, we are all just prisoners here of our own device. And in the master's chamber, They gathered for the feast. They stab it with their steely knives, but they just can't kill the beast. Last thing I remember, I was running for the door. I had to find the passage back to the place I was before. Relax, said the night man. We are programmed to receive. You can check out anytime you like.
But you can never
But you
leave.
can never
Leave.
Yeah. And I think the Eagles were reading the Proverbs and writing this at the exact same time. There's so much overlap in that imagery there.
Yeah.
Verse 15 says, stay off of it and keep going. Or don't stop at the hotel, whatever it is. Verse 16, they don't sleep unless they do evil. They are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. They eat the bread of evil and they drink the wine of violence. But unless you start to despair and think that it's all hopeless, that you can only check out and never leave, verse 18 chimes in with I think it's a road flagman pointing us back to the other road, letting people off. He's pointing to the road of wisdom again. The way of the righteous is like morning light that gets brighter and brighter and brighter until it's full daylight. But then he bounces back in verse 19 in contrast. But the path of the wicked is like deep darkness. They don't know where they will stumble. So, here's the deal. If the path of the wicked is such a terrible, terrible road, how is it that so many people end up on that road? Why do we go that way so often? Or to frame the question in a slightly different way, if wisdom is so valuable, why do people so easily abandon it? Now, look back on your own life. If you're given all this wisdom as a kid, so to speak, how is it you so easily did something completely different and screwed things up so royally when you did? Solomon is a case in point. While he was really into wisdom and he was blessed by God because he asked for wisdom, he ended up driving off the road during the second half of his life. Yep. Solomon was pathetic. So what causes people to do this kind of thing? What causes them to get off course? And I want to share with you the top 12 pathetic and somewhat random reasons why people steer off course. So you ready?
Yep.
The number 12 reason. Where's the drum roll? Oh, the number 12 reason, and for those, is distractions. Distractions. And for those of us with the attention span of a gnat, this would be one of the biggie reasons. Beware of the little distractions. Distractions that grab your attention away from the road. What might some of the distractions in life be? Who wants to suggest some? Money, you know, you have pursuit of money, okay. Well, what would be some other distractions?
Fame, popularity.
Fame, popularity, kind of like mine, you know. You want to be like me? What's that? Fun. Oh, we're going to have fun. Yeah, okay. So those are little distractions that get to us, yeah. The number 11 reason that people veer off course is neglect. Neglect. This comes back to the use it or lose it kind of advice. Wisdom is not like riding a bicycle. If you get on a bike after 30 years of not being on a bike, you can usually find your balance on that bike within a few seconds. Right? And if you're not on the ground first. But, you know, riding a bike comes back very, very quickly because it's so imprinted, the way that it imprints in your brain. If you try to walk wisely after 30 years of neglect, it's a rougher transition. Right? because the patterns are imprinted deeply on us. It's more like doing surgery. Think of it this way. Who do you want doing your heart surgery? Would you like to have an average surgeon who does 8 to 10 operations a week, or someone who was a brilliant, exceptionally good surgeon 15 years ago, but had a midlife crisis and started practicing psychiatry 10 years ago? I mean, he can still do heart surgery. He's still qualified to do it. He can do it in a pinch, but it's been 10 years.
Did he stay at the Holiday Inn Express?
Yeah, exactly. He stays at Hotel California. You know, why do teachers hate summer vacation?
Because the kids are off path by then when they come back.
That's right. The lag time is so long that students get out of rhythm, and they end up spending the first few months of each new school year reteaching what was taught in the previous year. When you slip on your diet. Has anybody ever been on? No, I'm not going to. If you slip on your diet, returning to it is twice as hard as starting it in the first place.
Slip again 3 times.
That's right. You just keep going. You know, it just gets harder and harder. When you slack off, it's harder to get back on. So, verse 13 says, hold on to instruction, don't slack off. Don't slack off. Then, number 10 reason, bad company. Bad company. We tend to become those with whom we surround ourselves. Right?
Yep.
Thus, verse 14 again, don't go on the way of the wicked. Don't walk on the path of evil people. And you can all name people, fairly decent people, who got caught up with the crowd around them. It can happen to whole nations. You know, you look at Germany in the 1930s and the 1940s, which is really a story for another time. But essentially, the whole country got into this kind of groupthink thing, and everyone was thinking that what their friends thought, and doing what their friends did, and adopting the attitudes and the mentality of their friends, and Number 9 reason. No continuing education credits. No continuing ed credits. No continuing ed credits. Many of us work in fields where we are required to have continuing education experiences in order to maintain our credentials. If you are not growing in your knowledge, the field will pass you by and you will end up incompetent. Without even doing anything wrong, you end up incompetent. Even if you were extremely competent at one point, that doesn't mean you're going to be competent in 5 to 10 years in the same field down the line if you have not done any continuing education. So, verse 13 is hold on to instruction. Specifically, in Proverbs, the instruction is the way of wisdom. It's the knowledge of the Lord. And this proverb resonates with me as an educator. Some of you know that early last month, I gave the commencement address at Pacific Islands University on Guam, where I continue to teach online classes and invest in the lives of the students there. Now, I should point out that that sounds like a great honor. It sounds like a greater honor than it actually is. And I mentioned this because, you know, when I came back from Guam, people said, you know, give us a report on Guam. So I'm integrating information on what I did in Guam into this context. And I was going to show the missionary slides, but I decided I didn't want to lug the TV in here this morning. So it was a greater honor. It sounds like a greater honor than it actually was. There were only 6 graduates this year. It was the smallest class in decades. And I was the fill-in speaker because the original speaker canceled at more or less the last moment. Okay? So they needed somebody that was available, and I happened to be on the way. I was available, and of course the original speaker was President Mori, who is the president of the Federated States of Micronesia, which is a nation of 106,000 people. A nation, a country of 106,000 people who are spread out in 4 states, over 600 small islands, and thousands of miles of ocean. Although I'll tell you that since we're doing a report on what goes on out there, the population of Micronesia, most of it, I bet half of the population now lives outside of the boundaries of Micronesia in places such as Hawaii or Guam or in the western U.S. But I tell you all that so that you know that they had me fill in for the president of Micronesia. And it sounds like a pretty big deal, doesn't it? I mean, I'm the president's fill-in guy. Yeah. Get it through the door. Anyway, I built my official commencement address around a song that I played on the ukulele.
All right.
And the Proverbs in verses 11 through 13. 11 and 13 here. They were on my radar because I was thinking about all this for the summer and thought those would be great. I teach you the path of wisdom. I lead you in straight courses. Hold on, verse 13, hold on to instruction. Don't slack off. Protect it, for it is your life. You see, our greatest desire as teachers is that students would hold on to what we've taught them, right? And part of what that means is that you would use that education as a foundation for further education. That you would continue to grow, that you would continue to expand in your knowledge. Because if you're not growing, if you are not continuing in your education in some way, shape, form, you are on the wrong path. You will not be successful in 10 years. You are on a path that will ultimately be unhealthy for you. So are you a continuing ed person? Are you continuing to learn, or have you stalled out? Are you growing in your knowledge of God and His way of doing things? Reason number 8. Some of these go pretty quick. Verse 13. Oh, number 8 is bad defense. Bad defense. Verse 13, hold on to instruction, don't slack off, protect it. You know, maintaining your guard is work. It requires time, and it requires energy, and it requires presence. And defense never seems to get a whole lot of attention, right? Nobody gets excited about guard duty. And even in sports, the focus is on the offense. Except that, I mean, that's who gets most of the attention and the adulation in every sport except where they have goalies.
Yep.
I mean, there's exceptions there, but even in those sports, it's not, the goalie is not the only person that is on the defense. There are a bunch of other defenders that never get attention. In soccer, hockey, there are other defenders, but they just don't get the adulation.
That's because we're the best.
Yeah. But the defense is critical. What are you doing to defend the wisdom that has been handed to you? What are you doing to defend the wisdom that has been handed to you? That's what the proverb is asking you to do. Think about that question. Number 7, bad steering. Bad steering. Verse 15 again, avoid it, don't turn on to it, stay off of it, and keep going. Sometimes we just make poor steering choices and we take a wrong turn. Usually because we're not paying enough attention. It's related to that attention span thing. It happens to me all the time, especially if my mind is kind of wandering and I don't get in the right lane soon enough, and especially if it's one of those confusing intersection with multiple choices that you can do. You know, you can turn right here, or you can turn sort of right, and you can turn this kind of. That's why I like roundabouts, because if I'm not in the right lane, I can just keep going around and around and around until I make my way into the proper spot. But if you don't get in the right lane soon enough, I end up turning in the wrong lane, and then it becomes a lane that is a safety issue. I can't get out of that exit, which is dumping me somewhere that I really don't want to go. This happened to me in Boston, and I was driving by myself, and the freeway, I have no idea how that lane ended up going down into that neighborhood, but the freeway dropped me off into a shady neighborhood in which I drove in circles trying to figure out how to get back onto the freeway. And feeling quite vulnerable in my shining rental car in an area where there were burned out car shells parked along the edge of each of the streets, I didn't really want to stop and ask for directions. You know, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want anybody to see me or to know that I was there. I just wanted people to leave me alone, and I'd figure out how to get out of there. And I think it took me about an hour until I found the freeway entrance out of that neighborhood. Wrong turns. Number 6, bad diet. What are you feeding your mind, your heart, your soul? Garbage in, garbage out. Look at verse 17. They eat the bread of evil and they drink the wine of violence. What are you eating these days? Number 6, thrills. 5 is thrills. There are people who get off the established pathways because they enjoy the thrill of blazing their own way. That's fun for some things, but you're responsible for other things. The way of wisdom can feel mundane, it can feel glitzy. It's not always that thrilling and contrast or excitement of living on the edge of death. And there's some people that, well, number 4 is the next reason, and it's related to that excitement. Addiction. Addiction. Sometimes you can't get enough of something. You can't get enough of that excitement, and you just keep feeding it because you just want to go on and on. So verse 16 says, they don't sleep unless they do evil. They are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. They're so addicted to this thrill. Number 3, stubbornness. Some of us, by nature, just do the opposite of what we are told. Because we do not want somebody telling us what to do. We're stubborn. And such people are going to loathe Proverbs because the Proverbs on the whole are way too rough, and the Proverbs are way too parental. I'm not sure what to say about this other than grow up and get over it. That's a parent thing to say, you know? Number 2, shortcut thinking. Shortcut thinking. Maybe this is you or somebody that you know. These are people who are always working an angle. They're trying to figure out a quicker, easier way to get where they want to be. If wisdom says that you have to work hard over time to get to be rich, the shortcut thinker is looking for the get rich quick scheme. They're looking for a system that will beat the lottery, or the system that will get them around having to pay taxes, or a system where they can flip real estate in kind of an invisible way. It's always something that they're coming up with. So if someone tells you that wisdom is about staying the course and to get to where you need to be, your instant response then would be to try to figure out a shortcut around staying the course over the long run. I was looking for a way out of it. And I think that's about 50% of the people who get lost in the desert are looking for a shortcut. I mean, that's just my educated guess after reading stories and stories about all these people who get lost out there. But there are no shortcuts. Quickie courses toward wise living. There are no shortcuts toward wise living that makes sense. Then the number 1 reason that people get off the road of wisdom is corrupted defaults. Corrupted defaults. This is the idea often called original sin. It's the idea that somewhere along the way, the default settings in our human condition were corrupted, and now, by nature, but not by original design, we've fooled ourselves into thinking that evil is the proper operating system. It's oversimplified, but that's in a nutshell what it is. It doesn't mean that we are as evil as we possibly could be, or that there is nothing good in us, but that our moral wires are crossed, and so by default, we selfishly gravitate toward the wrong pathway. That is the default to get off the road of wisdom and to get onto the other pathway. We're born into it. And we can't really free ourselves from it. Psalm 51:5 puts it this way. David's lamenting his own sinfulness. And he says, yes, I was born in guilt. I was born in sin from the moment my mother conceived me. The problem then becomes one of power. In a sense, all of this advice about attaining wisdom in all of Proverbs, all of this advice is lost if we are powerless to act on it. Right? You get all these nice words of, do this, do that, but if you're powerless to do it, we might be able to integrate a tidbit here and there, but as the overall defining default setting for life, we cannot ever become wise on our own. Even if we collect all of the Proverbs collection cards, the whole set. And even if you were to be able to memorize all of those Proverbs trading cards, it wouldn't work. We need new programming. We need new defaults. And that's where the gospel comes in. It's the good news of Jesus. He says, I am the way, think pathway, I am the pathway. He said, I am the way, the truth, think wisdom, right? And the life, think destination. No one gets to the Father except through me, John 14:6. And he backs up this powerful invitation with his actions, the way that he dishes out mercy and justice, the sacrifice of his very own life that ransomed us from the bandits who had captured us as we were walking along the wrong path, to play out on the metaphor. Jesus is the way, the pathway. He is the wise way. And while the advice of Proverbs is good, and the advice of Proverbs is absolutely necessary, its real significance is that it sets us up to see that Jesus is the way. And that if we're going anywhere significant in life, if we're going to break free from all of the chains that tether us to the old pathway, it will only be so if we are walking with Him. Walking alongside Him. Following Him. Follow Jesus and you will be safe and secure on the path of wisdom. Follow Jesus and you will be safe and secure on the path of wisdom. And that indeed is the good news.